Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. So today I want to talk about the advanced guide and give you kind of my run through and everything like that. I wanted to wait until after I cleared all of Emerald Nightmare, just because I was thinking there might have been some more changes between Heroic and Mythic and stuff like that. Turns out, not so much. And actually, Mythic Plus kind of sort of slaughtered the big change from Heroic to Mythic because everyone was having substantially higher gear than they usually would have, as opposed to like last expansion with Highmaul or something like that. But regardless, I really enjoyed Holy in Emerald Nightmare so far. I've really been enjoying it in Legion so far, and I wanted to kind of get into the nitty gritty and stuff like that of what's going on and go through a couple different things. So first I'm going to go into stats because I've been getting a ton of stat questions. Then we're going to kind of go into the overall meta and then kind of transition into the playstyle and things that you need to be looking for past just the basic guide and past just what is in my written guide and things like that. So, first things first with stats. I've been getting this question up like 3 times a day, actually, at least. There are no breakpoints. There are no breakpoints. There are no soft caps or breakpoints that you need to worry about. Alright, so why, what are the stats, yada yada yada. Okay, for my personal rating and for the purposes of this video, this is focused on progression because progression matters. While it is really nice to get ranks and everything like that, progression is what matters. So you prepare for progression, and I'm going to talk to people like they're progressing, right? Mastery is the top stat because of progression. You know, the extra healing, the high amount of additional healing, the constant trickle healing and stuff like that that it will do is exceptionally beneficial, and for all intents and purposes, it's free healing. It is so important to not worry about perfecting, like, oh my god, I must have all mastery though, because Critical Strike, on the other hand, is also very, very close to it. So there's no balancing act, there's none of that stuff where you need to fiddle with your gear. You don't want to fiddle with your gems and chants and stuff like that. There's no point to it, you know. I personally put crit just a little bit below mastery, but the gist of it is that Critical Strike has an insane value in Mythic 5-mans, and it gets a lot better when you add more healers or when you're going for farming ranks and stuff like that. But for progression purposes, again, your mastery is exceptionally strong. I know this will kind of go into some of the meta stuff. You've seen some people who are going with all crit, and they're going all crit because they're going towards more of a benediction style on many, many fights, but I'll kind of go into that a little bit later. So, don't worry about any balancing act or anything like that. I'll link my pawn strings below. If you use the add-on pawn, it helps you compare different items and stuff like that. But again, like I said, there's no balancing act. Don't worry about that stuff. Stop asking me. Stop asking me. Now, going into some of the meta and stuff like that, the general thing that's going on with Holy right now is that we're in a very heavy single target mode. We're in a very heavy flash heal mode, and it's happening for a number of reasons. There's like a perfect storm of reasons why flash heal is much better than using lots of prayer of healing or just spamming renew like last expansion. So, chief among those is the type of damage and the type of damage that can be healed up by the other healers. While Paladin has really good single target as well, Holy Priest really has insane, like, I guess sustain is the best way to say it, where you have Flash Heal with the talent Trail Light, which is definitely the preferred talent, which you should be taking all the time, which will constantly be giving you, you know, huge amounts of healing on 2 targets at a time, but then you're pushing Serenity's cooldown lower and lower, and then you're able to get it back off cooldown, and then you're tapping people off very quickly. And this is so exceptional because you're pairing it with the mechanics of encounters, which are targeting, you know, individuals more often than not. So you'll have, for example, Brambles, you'll have Spew Corruption, you'll have Brambles on Cenarius, you'll have Spew Corruption on Il'gynoth, you'll have, I guess the same mechanic on Nathendra and on Elrethra and Feral. You know, all of these encounters where they're putting focus damage on somebody or focus void zones on somebody which they can easily stand in or drop in or whatever like that. So those things all combined towards requiring just a higher amount of single target healing on individuals. The mass AoE is a little bit less than I probably was expected. And when there is mass AoE, it often is disproportionate to the raid. So, for example, you'll have constant damage on Cenarius, but at the same time, different people take different amounts of damage. So if somebody gets in front of the Dragon's Breath, or you have the tree, and the tree is stomping on melee, you know, all of these things where you're not having everybody take equal amounts of damage. So you kind of have to react differently towards it. And Divine Hymn is not always going to be your answer to it. So in comes Apotheosis as being the exceptional talent of choice. Now, I know a lot of people like Benediction and everything like that, and that makes sense. I get you. But in terms of Warcraft log ranking averages and stuff like that, if you're looking at all of the fights, more people are taking Apotheosis and succeeding with it more so than with Benediction. Benediction, like I said, has its place, but Apotheosis is really the king, and Apotheosis is really the thing that will take a lot more interaction, and it'll take a lot more time to master and to get good at, so keep that in mind as well. Like, Benediction has a lot of value in terms of just set and forget, and it has a lot of value on, like, Cenarius, Mythic Il'gynoth, and Dragons, you know, where there is more steady damage, there is more constant damage, and things like that that you can use it to react to. And again, that's why a lot of people are going to be going with large amounts of crit, because the fact that Mastery doesn't really do anything for Benediction, because those renews that you're putting out, they don't even have the initial application aspect to it, so they're not going to have any Mastery on the targets, besides just from the Prayer of Mending itself. So crit benefits Benediction a lot more heavily, and that'll move your stat priority a little bit. But now, in terms of, and we'll talk about the talents a little bit in a second, but in terms of why we are in such a flash heal heavy meta, another big portion of that issue is trinkets and mana regen, especially. Mana regen is always going to be so key, but in this tier so far, the things that regen us mana, the best ones at least, are all favored towards more flash heal. So your top two trinkets, for instance, are Amalgam 7 Spine and Darkmoon Deck Promises. Well, both of those benefit very heavily from flash heal. So Amalgam's the only way that you can put the Echo on the targets that you'll want to expire and then give you more mana back. Well, the only way to proc those is to use heal or flash. Alternatively, with the Promises deck, it always is giving you a discount for your spells. Every single spell has some kind of discount when you cast it. And it kind of shuffles the deck, and it kind of varies over time. But if you're casting two things in the space of one, well, you're getting two discounts in that time period rather than one. So, for example, 2 flash heals cost a little bit higher than a Prayer of Healing. I think it's like 10k more. But if you're getting 2 discounts, there is the potential and there's very high likelihood that those 2 flash heals will cost a lot less. You know, especially if they're going to be healing for about the same amount if you're also taking Trail of Light, which you probably will be. So, the fact that you're not only regenerating mana, but there's also the fight mechanics, and the other healers can't quite do it the way that you can, you know, makes Holy just an exceptional single target healer. Flash heal really is the meta at the moment, regardless of whether you're playing Apotheosis or Benediction. Now, that being said, Apotheosis, the biggest thing I've seen is, again, there's not really that much you can nitpick with people with Prayer of Mending. You're just saying, or with Benediction, you're just saying cast more Prayer of Mending. But with Apotheosis usage, the biggest thing that I've seen is people are really struggling with finding the right times to use it, and they're really struggling with perfecting it. So some fights I've seen people just not use it, period, which is really bad. Now, the criteria that you want to be looking for is constant, sustained, heavy damage on individuals. So you want to have damage that is disproportionately distributed to the raid. So Nathendra's Heart of the Swarm phase, for instance, is a great example of this, when all of the toxins and stuff like that are moving into the boss, and you have the bugs that are also popping up at the same time. Well, those are hitting the raid in disproportionate amounts, and you need to be aware of that in order to respond appropriately. So, coupled with the fact that it's also like a 25-second, 30-second period of time where Nathendra is doing this, so it fits perfectly with what you want to achieve with Apotheosis. All of those things kind of combine where you need to be using Serenities constantly because people are going to be standing in garbage, and, you know, a one-button top-off is exceptionally good. So, those are the kind of things. other fights is kind of like scenarios where the spell reflect will be up, or you'll be dealing with like the dragon or the tree. All of those things kind of combining at the same time, where you have multiple mechanics, multiple spell reflects, especially in Mythic where you're going to be burning him down. Most guilds have been doing that strategy now. You know, you need a huge chunk of burst damage that's also, or burst healing rather, that's not going to also drain your mana. You know, because while you'll be casting lots of flash heals, those holy words are all free now, so it's very good. Just going down the list, Ursoc, I mean, as you're getting into more and more burst damage, near the end of the fight, you're going to be needing more and more healing, especially the fact that the fight is about 4 minutes long for most people, 3.5, 4 minutes long, you know. Usually I'll just save it until about the very end, you know, because I'll also be low on mana, and I'll also need the burst of it. So, near the end of the fight on Ursoc, on Renferal, there's a number of times you can use it. It also depends on how many healers you have in the raid. A lot of times I will use it right as we're crossing over, right as we all have to fly, because a lot of the raid will be really low because we don't have a lot of mobile healers, and that'll get everybody topped off and, you know, situated and stuff like that in that 30-second period. On Dragons of Nightmare, it kind of depends on your co-healer and stuff like that when you split up, or how many healers that you have, but generally you'll find periods where everyone needs healing. A lot of times it'll be right after a Fear Bomb or something like that goes out. When you're pairing up with like Il'gynoth, for example, a lot of times the Spew Corruption will just be, you know, incredibly hard to deal with. So that'll be another part where you want to just be able to react quickly to it. I already talked about scenarios where you have the Spell Reflect, or you just have very high ticking damage on the raid because everybody will have high stacks. There's a lot of times you really can't go wrong on scenarios. There's a lot of periods of very high damage. Going on to Xavius, generally when you're stacking up, when you start getting into that period of the fight where you need a lot of people stacked up at the same time, people are still just taking a lot of damage in many other places. You definitely want to use, if you're dreaming, for instance, you want to be using Apotheosis before you break out of the dream, because then you'll get it back off cooldown as well. So keep those things in mind. It's a quick run through. Again, I have all my other videos of my boss kills that you can also see where I'm popping Apotheosis. Now, Benediction, I personally am not a really big fan of Benediction. It's very hands-off. It doesn't really do much. I know a lot of people have been talking about how they love the Enduring Renewal stuff with it, but I really hate it, and I think it's horrible, because you're spending so much time chasing your renews, where you're trying to chase the renew to refresh it, but at the same time somebody else is taking damage. So you're choosing between, oh, can I refresh my renew, which is the whole point of me taking this talent, or do I go heal this person that needs healing, you know? And while you're going to have some value, and while you're always going to miss them, I just don't think Enduring Renewal is, you know, something to ever keep on the radar, personally. So, with boss encounters and things like that, I think the biggest thing is focusing on when you can have the most impact in the raid. You know, things like Apotheosis are exceptionally strong, and I definitely wanted to make sure I clarified in terms of like my advanced holy guide in the written format, where I talk a lot about using Prayer of Healing and stuff like that, because while we're in an advanced meta, or while our meta is focused on Prayer of Healing, or while our meta is focused on Flash Heal, I wrote a ton about Prayer of Healing in the written form on Wowhead, and I did so because there's not a lot that you have to coordinate as Flash style. You know, you're going to be using Flash a lot, you know, whereas I built up a lot of it on Prayer of Healing in the written format, because there's very specific scenarios where you want to be using lots of Prayer of Healing. Because while Prayer of Healing is the highest HPS, just in terms of healing that you can do, not thinking about mana, there's also specific scenarios where you should be using it and you shouldn't be using it. For instance, Power of the Naru trait, it makes Prayer of Healing exceptionally insane, amazing, wonderful after you Sanctify. And because you're not going to be taking Holy Guidance until much later down the road, the artifact trait, you're really waiting for after a Sanctify to use it, because then you'll be having the Divinity buff, then you'll be having the Power of the Naru buff, and then you'll be able to, you know, have huge heals from that. You know, Prayer of Healing is a smart heal, so it'll have very, very low overheal. It shouldn't have over like 20% overheal when you're looking at logs and things like that. If it does, you're using it way too much. But I wanted to make sure I clarified on that, because Prayer of Healing is a very niche use. It has its uses. Sanctify also, they have limited uses, and you need to know, is it going to be worth my time to use this? Is it going to be worth my mana to use this? And things like that, When you're in Apotheosis, for example, a lot of times you're going to be focusing on straight single target constantly. But you also have to keep in mind that if you have Sanctify off cooldown, even if it's going to overheal on people and you're not saving it for later, you definitely want to use it because it's free, You're healing a couple targets, and you're also going to put the mastery on them, So there will be that value regardless. You just need to make sure that you're using it. So every bit of Apotheosis should always be casting spells that trigger Serendipity, or casting spells that are the holy words and things like that. You don't want to be casting much else besides that. That's a big thing. So I think, like I said, the biggest thing, when you're trying to master Holy, a lot of it will come down to the timing with Apotheosis if you're taking it. And like I said, I prefer Apotheosis for progression purposes and probably even ranking purposes, really. Benediction will come into play when you just have the all good healers, but all a lot of damage and very constant sustained damage. We'll see, and it definitely gets more attractive if you have the Legendary Pants, which increase the renewed duration. But we will see with the 7.1 changes that are coming around the corner how much Benediction might come into play, because with a nerf to Divinity, with a buff to Palm, with a buff to Renew, it might start shifting heavily towards a Benediction style if you have a lot of Renew, if you have the Renew Legendary. So keep that in mind. Like I said, work on perfecting your Apotheosis. I think in most cases, that'll be the biggest thing that you can do to kind of boost up your healing, is finding those scenarios where you're able to use Apotheosis properly, working on your targeting and things like that with your holy words, just to be able to drop these huge heals on people and be faster than your other healers to do so, to reduce your overhealing. Another huge problem I've seen is people hold on to their holy words way too much. I generally have a Divinity uptime of like 45 to 50% on many of these logs. So that'll be probably where you want to be looking at for yourself as well. Keep using your holy words. They are your bread and butter. They are huge heals. They are really necessary heals in your toolkit. So keep it up. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, on Twitch, on YouTube comments here and stuff like that. Enjoy. I'll catch you all tomorrow.